Hi everyone, I'll be discussing chapter 3 called The Man in the Moon and the Face of Mars. Within chapter 3, there was a lot of main themes that was discussed. There was pattern recognition and viewing figures as the most touched on main theme, where Sagan discussed how humans are wired to look at shapes and figures, and they can recognize patterns that they already know that are familiar to them, and they might place that on something else with a similar shape or formation that they already know, which leads into why a lot of people were putting a lot of misconceptions on the moon and the Mars. There was a lot of people believing that the moon and the Mars was some sort of man or some sort of live creature, and this stems from a lot of fake theories that did not have enough evidence, and a lot of historical stuff too, and a lot of cultures and religions playing into it. There was many religions that would look at stuff and they would think that it's a symbol of a god or God himself, or a symbol even of a miracle. Examples of this would be Spain that would look at the clouds and they would think that's the Virgin Mary. Or, there was actually a movie called The Man in the Moon, which is where the main misconception, where people were always talking about how they think that the moon is actually a man, when it's really not. But why might many people think this, and why was this thought for so long? Which has a lot of skepticism and critical thinking, and Sagan had this as another main theme, just being skeptical and thinking hard about all these ideas. Sagan looked at the importance of skepticism and interpreting perceived patterns and differentiating why somebody might think this way. And then there was also a main theme of the importance of evidence-based understanding and knowing why something was formed the way it did. Sagan discussed many times there was all these formations that people never knew for a long time how it got there. He looked at research further instead of saying, oh, it was an alien that made these things get here that we don't know what it was. He looked at research that explains, how did this scientifically happen? How did the environment do this? Was this a human that did it? Or was it the environment? Or was it aliens? And he looked further rather than looking at mass media claims that showed one thing, but it never showed the research of how they knew that. And it showed how people are gullible to look at a theory and think that it's actually true. And it leads into two central ideas, which would be the necessity of critical thinking and skepticism. So once you hear a claim, don't always think that it's true. You might hear something on the news that, oh, this and this happened, but you gotta look further into it rather than what they're providing you, because they might not be providing you all the correct information that you actually need to know whether it's true or not. And another essential idea of the role of science in debunking misconceptions and making sure that that you're following the right things, and what's scientifically true and what's scientifically not. And to go further into this, you have to look at the random patterns that resembles further objects, so you're skeptical of how why a cow looks the way it does, and why you might think a cow looks like a celebrity that Well, there's always a chance that you see another object with a familiar face and you place it on that object, such as a cow. And making sure that you're debunking easy misconceptions. He used the example of the man in the moon and the face of the Mars a lot. and he clarified the misunderstandings that were born from human inquiry and visual misconceptions. So 2 questions that he had was on page 46, he said that occasionally a vegetable or a pattern of wood grain or the hide of a cow resembles a human face. There was a celebrated eggplant that closely resembled Richard Nixon. What shall we deduct from this fact? Divine or extraterrestrial intervention? Republican meddling in eggplant genetics? My answer to that would be neither. It's based on the human brain perceives the objects. The eggplants, for example, can come from large objects, and due to that, it can have some people thinking it looks like a face, and that's why a lot of people thought that it resembled Richard Nixon. On page 52, it said, similar features are also known on Earth in miniature, especially in Antarctica. Some of them would come up to your knees. If we knew nothing about them, would it be fair to conclude that they have been manufactured by skilled model Egyptians living in the Antarctic wasteland? My answer to this would be no. It was not made by humans either, and I personally think that, it's unrealistic to say Egyptians made those, especially if they were located in the Antarctic. We now know that those are from wind erosions and how fast the wind was blowing, and sometimes when they land on rocks, they can make the formation of some sort of structure that we know. Also, as well as the lighting too, can make it look a certain way and we can perceive it as something when really there's not that much structure to it. On page 55, there was a question that said, when we examine the neighboring jumble of hillocks, mesas, and other complex surface forms, we recognize that the feature is akin to many that do not at all resemble a human face. Why this resemblance? Would the Asian Martian engineer rework only this mesa? Well, maybe a few others, and leave all the unimproved by monumental sculpture? Or shall we conclude that the other blocky mesas and sculpted into form of faces, but weirder faces, unfamiliar on Earth? I would say to this, the best picture of the face is due to the lighting from the sun and the transmission signals from radios as NASA provided. A good example of this would be, the famous nose that NASA had where they saw the nose. Well, it had everything to do with the lighting and the signals that they got and how exactly the shade was hitting the rocks at that certain moment. If I were to rate this and what Sagan discussed about his theories and how he backed it and how accurate it is, I would believe from my own experience, I would put it at a 6. I do strongly believe that his thoughts do convey well with how people think today, if I base it on the people that I currently know. And to rate it based on the main themes that I already discussed earlier about pattern recognition and using evidence-based thinking, I would believe that I would rate this at a 5. He did a pretty good try at, making it clear of how every question he had evidence-based thinking and how you should be skeptic of any news article that seems kind of suspicious, seems kind of too good to be true. He did a pretty good job at explaining it, but there was just some areas that just need it just needed to be a little clearer. I found myself, having to reread it a lot to understand it a little better, and which also it explains how he mentioned earlier in a couple chapters earlier how, you know, scientific literacy is so important. It's so important that you can understand scientific theories correctly and stuff. So it's, you know, it's how it is.